The smell of rotting flesh overwhelmed seasoned courtiers. They vomited in the royal presence. Dogs licked fluids leaking from the king's coffin. This is the true story of Henry VIII's death, a story his government suppressed for 450 years. You know Henry VIII as the king who executed 2 wives and broke from Rome. But the way he died, rotting from the inside out over 11 agonizing years, reveals a medical horror story that changes everything we thought we knew about the Tudor dynasty. Secret physician records, hidden for centuries, have finally revealed the truth. And it begins with a jousting accident that would destroy him piece by piece. Chapter 1. The Accident, January 24, 1536, Greenwich Palace. Henry VIII, age 44, charges down the tilt-yard on his war horse. He's still relatively fit, around 280 pounds of muscle and armor. The crowd watches as England's king lowers his lance. Then, catastrophe. The horses collide with devastating force. Henry's body, 300 pounds of man and metal, slams into frozen ground. His destrier, a massive war horse in full armor, stumbles and falls directly on top of him. The tilt-yard goes silent. For 2 hours, Henry VIII lies unconscious. 2 hours where England has no king. 2 hours where Anne Boleyn, pregnant and desperate for a male heir, waits in agony. When Henry wakes, witnesses report something disturbing. His eyes hold a different light, something darker, more unpredictable. His first words aren't relief or concern. He flies into rage, demanding to know why the tournament stopped. The charming Renaissance prince, fluent in 4 languages, composer of music, debater of theology, never fully returned from that tilt-yard. Modern neuroscientists studying the records believe Henry suffered traumatic brain injury to his frontal lobe. The evidence is compelling. Before 1536, Henry showed remarkable restraint for an absolute monarch. He'd been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 20 years before seeking annulment. His executions were relatively few. After January 1536, everything changed. Anne Boleyn lost her head 4 months later. Thomas Cromwell followed. The executions began in earnest. Servants reported finding Henry weeping uncontrollably one moment, screaming for blood the next. But the brain injury was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The wound that never healed, the same accident that damaged Henry's brain, reopened an old leg wound. And this is where tragedy becomes body horror. Henry had suffered a previous leg injury years earlier, probably from jousting. It had healed, leaving only a small scar, but the 1536 accident tore it wide open. In Tudor England, without antibiotics or understanding of infection, an open wound was a death sentence. Just a very slow one. Court physician Dr. Thomas Vicari's secret notes, hidden until the 1960s, describe ulcers of a grievous nature, stinking and painful beyond measure. The king's legs had to be drained daily, sometimes twice, filling bronze bowls with infected fluid. Imagine living with open sores the size of tennis balls on both legs, not for days or weeks, for 11 years, constantly weeping pus, never fully healing. Pain so intense that even silk bedsheets made him scream. But Henry, in his vanity and paranoia, tried desperately to hide his deterioration. He designed special garters with lead weights to compress the wounds, believing pressure would force them closed. Instead, this cut off circulation and worsened the infection. He drenched himself in expensive Arabian perfumes, rose oil mixed with ambergris, to mask the stench. He instructed portrait painters to depict him with impossibly athletic legs, standing in that famous power stance we all recognize. The infection wasn't just destroying his legs, it was poisoning his bloodstream. Modern medical analysis suggests Henry developed chronic osteomyelitis, a bone infection that releases constant bacteria and inflammatory compounds throughout the body. The toxins traveled to his brain, his liver, his heart. The symptoms would have made his life hell. Constant, excruciating pain, fever and chills. Wild appetite swings between nausea and insatiable hunger. Most devastating were the neurological effects. Toxins crossing into his brain caused violent mood swings unrelated to his actual emotions. One moment laughing at a jest, the next ordering the jester's execution. Paranoid delusions became commonplace. He saw enemies everywhere, servants poisoning his food, wives committing adultery, assassins lurking in every shadow. By 1540, just 4 years after the accident, Henry had executed his second wife, annulled his marriage to his third, and was hunting for number 4. Chapter 3: The Body Horror Years. The year 1542 marked a terrible turning point. Dr. Vicari's notes describe a change in the discharge, once yellow-white pus, now turning green, then brown. The smell evolved from merely foul to what witnesses described as the stench of death itself. Henry's weight exploded. Unable to exercise, eating constantly to distract from his misery, he ballooned from 280 pounds to well over 350. His armor from 1540, preserved in the Tower of London, shows a 48-inch waist. By 1545, new armor required a 54-inch waist. That's larger than most modern refrigerators. The palace had to be modified. Doorways were widened. You can still see the construction marks at Hampton Court. Floors were reinforced after the king's weight caused dangerous sagging. Special chairs were built with removable arms because Henry could no longer fit between them. His daily routine became an elaborate performance to hide deterioration. He would be dressed lying in bed, requiring 4 servants to manage his massive limbs. A system of pulleys and slings lifted him upright. He was transferred to a wheeled chair, carefully concealed from public view. Middle CTA, natural break. If you're discovering details about Tudor history you've never heard before, consider supporting this work by leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps preserve and share these hidden historical truths. Chapter 4: Descent into Madness. By 1544, courtiers reported behavior beyond mere bad temper. Henry held conversations with people who weren't there. He argued with his dead father, defending his treasury expenditures. He called out for his mother, Elizabeth of York, dead since he was 11. Most disturbing were his interactions with the ghosts of his victims. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the king suddenly stop mid-sentence during state business. His face would drain of color, staring at empty air. He would whisper, "No, not now," or "Leave me," before exploding in rage at confused counselors. The French ambassador described Henry suddenly screaming at an empty chair, ordering Anne Boleyn to stop laughing at him. His paranoia reached extraordinary heights. He became convinced servants were poisoning him through his leg bandages. He would demand the pus-soaked dressings be brought to him for inspection, sniffing them suspiciously before allowing them to be burned. He hired food tasters not just for meals, but for medicines. He forced unfortunate servants to apply his ointments to their own skin first. By Christmas 1546, Henry had become barely recognizable as human. Contemporary accounts describe a massive figure propped in his throne, unable to stand without assistance. His face had swollen to nearly twice its original size, distorted by fluid retention. His eyes, once bright blue, compared by poets to summer skies, had become yellowish and bloodshot, sunk deep in pouches of discolored flesh. The smell emanating from the royal person became impossible to disguise. Despite pounds of perfume, burning incense, and fresh herbs scattered on floors, the stench of decay followed Henry everywhere. Courtiers discreetly held pomanders to their noses when approaching the throne. Delicate ladies would excuse themselves and vomit after mandatory appearances. Chapter 5. The Hidden Portrait. Henry's final portrait, the famous Whitehall portrait, contains a devastating secret. When X-rayed in 1960 during restoration, conservators discovered something shocking. The king's left hand, which appears gripping a simple cane, originally held something else: a wooden staff topped with a human skull. This macabre walking stick wasn't Gothic fashion. Henry had become so obsessed with death that he carried this reminder everywhere. He would tap the skull against the floor during conversations, a nervous tic that unnerved even loyal courtiers. The skull was rumored to belong to a monk from one of the dissolved monasteries. Some whispered it belonged to an executed enemy. Hans Holbein painted this detail accurately. But after Henry's death, his son Edward VI ordered it painted over. The young king couldn't bear his father remembered as a death-obsessed madman. Court records from late 1546 paint a picture of terror. Henry's mood swings became so extreme that courtiers developed an elaborate warning system. Pages signaled the king's disposition using colored ribbons: red for rage, black for depression, white for increasingly rare moments of calm. Henry began ordering executions of people already dead, having forgotten he'd killed them years earlier. One chilling incident occurred during a state banquet in November 1546. The French ambassador reported that mid-meal, Henry suddenly stood, a process requiring several servants and causing visible agony, and began shouting at an empty chair. "You dare show your face at my table, witch?" he screamed, pointing at nothing. The court sat frozen as Henry continued his tirade against what he clearly believed was Anne Boleyn's ghost. "I took your head once. I'll take it again." Then he collapsed back into his chair and resumed eating as if nothing had happened. Chapter 6. The Final Decline. January 1547. Whitehall Palace. Henry VIII enters his final decline. What happens next is so disturbing that his government suppressed the records for centuries. The ulcers on his legs had grown beyond anything physicians had seen. Dr. Thomas Wendy's suppressed medical notes, discovered in 1891, described wounds so deep that bone was clearly visible. The flesh around the ulcers had turned black. Gangrene was setting in. The smell became unbearable. Servants fainted while changing bedsheets. Windows stayed open despite freezing January weather because the stench would fill any closed room within minutes. Henry's body had become a mass of corruption. His skin turned sickly yellow from liver failure. The whites of his eyes matched, giving him an inhuman appearance. His tongue swelled so badly he could barely speak, his words coming as wet, gargling sounds that required close servants to interpret. His breath smelled of rotting meat, a sign the infection had spread to his digestive system. His massive weight made caring for him nearly impossible. It took 6 strong men to turn him in bed to prevent bed sores. His legs had swollen so much that the skin split in multiple places, weeping clear fluid that soaked through dozens of bandages daily. On January 20th, Henry experienced the beginning of multiple organ failure. His kidneys, overwhelmed by constant toxins, began shutting down. His urine, when he could produce any, was dark brown and reeked of ammonia. His abdomen swelled with fluid, causing agonizing pressure on his organs. The king's mental state alternated between terrifying clarity and complete delirium. In lucid moments, he knew he was dying. He begged physicians to save him, promising wealth beyond imagining. When they failed, he raged at them, threatening torture and execution, though he lacked strength to sign warrants. In delirious periods, Henry revealed the depths of his terror. He cried out for his mother, dead nearly 40 years, begging her to protect him from demons crawling from beneath his bed. He had conversations with his brother Arthur, dead since 1502, apologizing for taking his throne and his wife. Most pathetically, he called out for Catherine of Aragon, asking her forgiveness, though she died alone and abandoned 11 years earlier. The court maintained an elaborate facade. Official proclamations described the king as recovering from a minor ailment. Ambassadors were told Henry was simply resting. Meanwhile, Edward Seymour and the Privy Council were already planning succession, knowing the king had days to live. Chapter 7. The Death. On January 27th, Henry suffered a massive stroke. The right side of his face drooped grotesquely. Drool pooled on his pillow as he lost control of facial muscles. His speech became completely incomprehensible. England's mighty king, who had once commanded the Reformation with his words, couldn't even ask for water. Yet even paralyzed and rotting, Henry tried to maintain tyrannical control. Using his one functioning hand, he attempted to sign death warrants. His final intended victim, the Duke of Norfolk, who had served faithfully for decades but fallen from favor. The signature was an illegible scrawl, but Henry's servants, terrified even of the dying king, prepared to carry out the execution. Only Henry's death the next day saved Norfolk from the scaffold. Here's where the story takes a turn. Historians tried to hide for centuries. Henry VIII didn't die peacefully in his sleep like official records claim. He died screaming. Archbishop Cranmer's private diary, discovered at Lambeth Palace in 1983, provides the only eyewitness account. Cranmer arrived near midnight on January 27th to provide last rites. What he found in the royal bedchamber shocked even this experienced clergyman. Henry was experiencing seizures so violent that 6 men had to hold him down. His massive body convulsed with such force that the reinforced bed frame cracked. Between seizures, he vomited black bile, a sign his digestive system was hemorrhaging internally. The smell was beyond description. Cranmer wrote that he had to excuse himself twice to vomit. During brief moments of stillness, Henry's eyes focused on things that weren't there. He cried out for his dead children, the miscarriages and stillbirths that had plagued his quest for heirs. He begged them to forgive him. He promised to be a better father if they would just come back. Then his voice would change, becoming high and terrified as he screamed about flames, demanding someone put out the fire only he could see. As the clock approached 2 a.m. on January 28th, Henry's breathing changed to the death rattle, a wet gurgling sound as his lungs filled with fluid. Cranmer, following Protestant doctrine, asked the dying king for a sign if he trusted in Christ for salvation. He took Henry's massive, swollen hand and asked him to squeeze if he died in the faith of Jesus Christ. Henry squeezed once, weakly. Then his grip went slack. At 2:07 a.m., January 28, 1547, King Henry VIII of England was dead. But the horror wasn't over. Chapter 8. The Exploding Coffin. Henry's corpse began decomposing with shocking speed. The infection that had ravaged his body didn't stop with death. It accelerated. Within hours, his already bloated body swelled even larger as bacteria produced gases inside the corpse. The smell impossibly grew worse. Servants stationed outside the death chamber could be heard retching. The Privy Council made an extraordinary decision: keep Henry's death secret for 3 days. They needed time to figure out how to handle the rapidly deteriorating corpse. Embalmers were summoned urgently, but they faced an impossible task: When they opened Henry's body to remove organs for preservation, they discovered the extent of internal decay. The liver was so enlarged and diseased it fell apart when touched. The heart, swollen to nearly twice normal size, was surrounded by yellow fluid. The intestines were black with gangrene. One embalmer's assistant fainted when the stomach was opened, releasing such concentrated stench that workers fled the room. The embalmers worked frantically for 2 days using extreme techniques. They packed the body cavity with over 100 pounds of salt and aromatic herbs. They wrapped the corpse in waxed cloth soaked in turpentine. They sealed everything in a massive lead coffin that required special reinforcement to hold the weight. But even these measures couldn't contain Henry's decay. During the lying in state at Whitehall, witnesses reported strange sounds coming from the coffin. Pops and gurgles as gases continued building inside. The lid began to bulge outward. Officials hurriedly draped more black cloth to hide the distortion. Then came the procession to Windsor Castle on February 14th. Henry's coffin, weighing nearly half a ton, required a specially built carriage pulled by 8 horses. The journey that should have taken 1 day stretched to 3, as horses struggled with the weight and roads turned to mud. On the second night, the procession stopped at Sion Abbey, ironically, one of the monasteries Henry had dissolved. The coffin was placed in the chapel overnight. What happened next was so grotesque it passed into legend, though contemporary accounts confirm it occurred. The pressure from gases inside Henry's decomposing corpse finally became too much. The lead coffin split open with a sound witnesses described as like a thunderclap. Putrid fluids leaked out, pooling on the chapel floor. The smell was so overwhelming that guards fled their posts. Then came the final grotesque indignity. In the morning, workers discovered that dogs had entered the chapel during the night. They found the animals licking the pooled fluids that had leaked from the king's coffin. The man who had styled himself God's anointed, who had broken from Rome to assert his divine right to rule, ended up as food for scavenging dogs. Palace workers used sawdust and lime to soak up the remains, working with cloths tied over their faces. The coffin was hastily resealed with fresh lead. When the procession finally reached Windsor Castle, Henry was buried quickly without the elaborate ceremony originally planned. This scene was so damaging to royal prestige that Edward Seymour ordered all witnesses to absolute silence on pain of death. The official record stated simply that Henry had died peacefully and been buried with all appropriate honors. The truth was hidden so effectively that it only emerged centuries later through private diaries and foreign diplomatic reports. Henry VIII, the king who executed wives, demolished monasteries, and terrorized a nation, died rotting from the inside out, screaming in terror, his corpse so putrid it exploded in its coffin. The Golden Renaissance prince, once called the handsomest ruler in Christendom, ended his life as a 400-pound mass of infection and decay. Abandoned by terrified courtiers, his final remains licked up by dogs. This is the death that changed the Tudor dynasty, the death his own government tried to erase from history. If this hidden history revealed something you never learned in traditional accounts, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Share it with anyone fascinated by the real stories behind royal history. These suppressed truths deserve to be told. Thank you for watching.